the political process is heavily influenced by the polarization which has been affecting our politics for the last decade or so, and the contentiousness over judicial nominations, it seems to me, is simply one more reflection of this polarization.
This is At Brookings, a weekly in-depth look at issues behind the news. This week, judicial nominees and Senate gridlock.
The job of naming judges to the nation's federal courts has become increasingly difficult in recent years. Observers say acute partisan polarization in the Senate has made it especially difficult for President Obama to get his nominees approved. And even though the 2010 lame duck session produced 11th hour confirmations for a handful of the president's choices, many more still languish in committee. Visiting fellow Russell Wheeler looks at the process and the problems.
It's always been a political process because you're always making judgments about who ought to be a judge and who ought to exercise the authority vested in the federal judiciary. But the process looks very different now than it did certainly 50 years ago, in which the presumption was that if the president nominated somebody who was professionally qualified, that person got confirmed, whether or not the Senate was controlled by one party and the president by another. It was the way government worked. Starting, I don't know, people say maybe starting with the Clinton administration, the process really started to break down, at least as to Court of Appeals judges, which tend to be a little more controversial because the view is the Court of Appeals have more of a legal policy role than the district courts. And we saw confirmations for Clinton and then Bush and now certainly Obama's Court of Appeals nominees become much more contentious, and the confirmation rate dipped. For district judges, up until this administration, the confirmation rate has been fairly easy and fairly high, and the process has worked fairly smoothly.
How does President Obama's confirmation rate compare to President Bush's confirmation rate? President Obama is a Democratic president. He has a Democratic Senate. President Bush was a Republican with a Democratic Senate.
It's an interesting thing that George Bush barely squeaked into office, and he had a Democratic majority in the Senate, a very thin majority. He's going to come out, as far as confirmation rates go, he's going to come out much better than Obama, who had a fairly resounding electoral victory and had, for the first 2 years, almost a veto-proof majority in the Senate. So why it is that it's getting slowed up, I think you have to attribute more than anything else is to the rules of the Senate. The Senate works on unanimous consent, and that puts in the hands of any single senator who wants to slow things down the ability to do so, and obliges the majority sometimes to take the risk of having a floor vote over a non-controversial judicial nominee. The Senate majority leader has to make a choice. Do I want to risk having to spend 30 hours debating a judicial nominee, or do I want to proceed?
What's the benefit to the president when he stacks the federal bench?
As we speak, there's a lot of debate over whether provisions of the health care bill will be declared unconstitutional or not. And Judge Hudson here in Virginia declared provisions of it unconstitutional. That will go to the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Now, Obama has been able to shift the balance of party appointees on that court, which was once a very conservative court. Now there's a slight majority of Democratic nominees. So there's a difference right there.
Well, if the Senate delays confirming the president's nominations, how does this affect John Q. Citizen?
The system is built to tolerate vacancy. Nevertheless, you have fewer judges along the border where there may be prosecutions for immigration offenses. The District of Delaware, with 4 judgeships, has been without the full complement of judges since 2006 or so. And that's a busy commercial court. That doesn't affect the person on the street on a daily basis, but if you have commercial litigation that's in Delaware getting held up because there's not enough judges, that's a bad thing in and of itself.
And you've said that state courts are being impacted by this stonewalling as well. This
contention over judicial, who goes on the bench, isn't limited to the federal courts by any matter of means. The November 2010 elections saw real bitter battles over Supreme Court justices in the state level, including out in Iowa, where the three judges of the 7-judge court, which unanimously declared invalid Iowa's prohibition on same-sex marriage, the 3 judges who came up in the regular order for whether to be retained were all defeated. They were defeated largely with the use of out-of-state, out-of-Iowa money by groups who are going after judges making decisions that are unpopular. So in the federal level, it's hard to explain what the contention is all about. In the state level, it's clearly over judicial decisions which people disfavor and are willing to raise a lot of money to get judges out of office because they make those decisions. So it's not confined to the federal courts by any matter of means.
Obviously, stonewalling on these nominations affects the federal courts, but it also affects the president to some degree. Explain that, please.
Some people have the chutzpah to say something like this when the campaign comes up. And furthermore, Obama has appointed many fewer judges than previous presidents. I mean, people will say something like that and not add on. And the reason he did is because we wouldn't confirm them. You know, they'll obviously be able to say he didn't nominate as many as Bush did. I mean, he has, I think, around 74, 75 district nominees. Bush nominated over 90 in his first 2 years, and somewhat similar in the Court of Appeals. But that doesn't explain why the people he has nominated haven't been confirmed. And I guess all you can say is that he could get charged with failing to do his duty in putting people on the bench, but it's a two-way street.
Stay up to date with the latest research, learn about Brookings events, and search our directory of experts, all from your mobile device. To download Brookings for your BlackBerry, Android, or iPhone, go to brookings.edu/mobile.